Dr. Spencer. Welcome back to the White Tiger, and thank you again to all of those of you who have subscribed. Today is a follow-up video to the Foundation Series Part 2 that we did last week. And we started to talk about fear, and we started to talk a little bit about fear and how it is involved in the development of self, but we didn't spend a lot of time with it. We just sort of laid down the foundation for really this discussion. So we wanted to take some time to really talk about how fear factors into the development of self and what that looks like, and how that impacts us later in life, which is really critical. So just kind of in a quick review, we did look at the sympathetic nervous system being the source of fight, flight, freeze, and it's the only place where fear lives. And anything that precipitates fear precipitates anxiety. So if you have anxiety, you are in fight, flight, freeze, be it a little bit, a moderate amount, or a lot. This is the only place where anxiety exists. If you do not have anxiety and you feel very calm and you feel very safe, you are in what we call calm and relax, which is a nice name for the parasympathetic nervous system. And we tend to respond to most things that come along in life really in one of these two ways, either with anxiety or feeling very comfortable. So we started to talk about this relationship and how it goes both ways. But today we want to focus on how the relationship is interpreted here on the infant and child side. So the infant and child is born naturally with instincts or hardwired survival skills. And those hardwired survival skills are imperative in the development of this relationship both ways. But as we will learn even further down the road, the ability to make this connection is about survival, right? You can't make a connection, you can't survive. So sometimes we can make a connection, but it's not a really good one. So if it's not a really good one, then we don't feel really safe, we don't feel really secure. So the connection can be insecure or uncertain or even unsafe. In that case, the child has to do whatever it can think of. And again, this is more instinctual. This is all occurring below the cortex of how to mitigate the response that the parent or the provider is giving so that they can get their needs met. So an example, a child who cries and the caregiver or the provider has an angry response. The child will learn in that case to stop crying. So as they move through that relationship, as that relationship matures, the child will learn that crying does not get a need met. And then the deduction is my emotions must be suppressed so that I can get my needs met. And then we get into what we were calling survival coping skills or survival coping strategies, where the child will modify their behavior in order to elicit a positive response that leads to survival for the child. We'll spend much more time on that. That's not where we're going to really focus on today. But what happens in this dynamic is as the back and forth exchange occurs, the child starts to learn, right? This is a learning process. And they start to learn, who am I? Who am I? So in this space, right, in this space, in this exchange, is where self is developed. So the information that the child gets back teaches the child that how they are perceived, and how they are perceived then becomes their perception of themselves, or how they believe they are perceived. So if this is a not perfect attachment, this is not a perfect connection, if there's some insecurity or uncertainty, then there will be fear, right? We have to have food and shelter, safety and security, love and belonging. If we feel unsure about any of that, but particularly this portion, there will be fear. Fear of not having this And that will translate into there's something wrong with me, right? A child will never indict a parent or a caregiver because that would be counter to this. So a child or infant will never assume that the issue is here. It will always assume the issue is here because that's the only information that it has. So out of that grows the fear. And within the context of the human psyche, we have 7 core fears. And these are the 7 core fears. Our first fear is the fear that the infant is or child is concerned about the most. And that is fear of rejection. Right? If you're rejected, it's over. So fear of rejection is abandonment. And I'm writing it that way for a reason. Abandonment. If your provider rejects you, you are in very big trouble. The next fear is fear of being alone. And that is also fear of abandonment. The third fear is fear of worthlessness. Right? If we're worthless, we will be abandoned. Now, the other fears really factor into as we mature, but they all go back to this, as you will be able to process even on your own as we go through this. The next one is fear of failure, right? That leads to rejection, abandonment. Fear of the unknown. That one never really goes away. Fear of loss of external control. And fear of loss of internal control. If you distill down very many of your actions, behaviors, and decisions, you will find at the bottom, these were the driving components, the drivers for some of the decisions, maybe some of the major decisions that you have made, maybe some of the minor decisions that you make, maybe many of the decisions that you make. But when there is fear of anything that looks like abandonment, rejection being alone, or worthlessness, and these then translate into those things, and fear of the unknown goes back to usually fear of failure, and then also whatever stems from that, lead us all to a single conclusion. So if we don't feel that this relationship is strong or secure, we have these fears ever present, particularly rejection, aloneness, and worthlessness. We interpret that into who we then believe we are, or who we become. And if we're getting those messages from our provider. The interpretation that we will make is this: I am not good enough. I am not good enough. All of this translates into I am not good enough. And when you distill down so much of what happens in therapy, so much of what underlies persistent anxiety is I am not good enough. And if we've concluded that we're not good enough to have a good, secure, strong attachment, because that is what we will conclude, then that is how we will carry our self-perception through life. And what we do when we're not good enough, and we believe that we're not good enough, is that we engage in self-judgment. We beat ourselves up over and over and over again because we believe that we were absolutely given the message that we are not good enough. And that is why the second posting after the Foundation Series Part 1, A Pause, a Reflection, and the Path to Psychological Freedom was written, was in preparation for understanding that this relationship eventually causes us to develop a sense of who we are. And if the attachment is not secure and strong and certain, then we will be afraid of these things. And if these things are persistent and they don't go away, and the messages that we're given is that they're not going to go away, we conclude that we are not good enough. And then we begin with self-judgment. So then we conclude that who we are is not worthy, right? We're not good enough. So this is why love and belonging factors so much into the development of self. And if the self then concludes that it's not good enough or it's not worthy, then it becomes very hard to get here, and harder still to get here. So that is why, really why, The White Tiger is being written, to be honest, is to how do we get a sense of self that feels good enough, or believes that it is good enough, or understands that it is good enough, and ceases self-judgment. So what we'll do, starting in the next post, is really look at, there are 5 elements of this connection, this interaction, this engagement. We will look at each of the 5 elements and how they are factored into our coping strategies for survival, and the lifelong impact of what that looks like in terms of how we make decisions, how we function, and even how we live. Thank you so much. That is the post for today. And I just hope you have an awesome day, and we will see you next time on The White Tiger.